This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Nanette Bartow here, along with Nolan Del Campo. We're going to invite him in as part of today's show. Good morning, Nolan.
Good morning, Nanette.
We basically just kind of touched or briefed for a second there on something called The Family. It's a new docu-series on Netflix that I just started to watch last night. I haven't really gripped exactly everything that it's about, but basically they likened it to a religious mafia. And I've always kind of had this thought that religion was kind of corporatized, or at least it was used to control the masses. And in this documentary, the way they're even beginning it, it is what they used to control. I asked you a little bit about it. I know you haven't seen it yet, but if anybody is interested in something like this, it involves presidents, it involves politicians. It's on Netflix. I don't know how many episodes there are to it at this point, but it is headed by an investigative journalist who is actually inducted into this particular, The Family, as they call it. But does that sound like something that you'd be interested in?
Oh, definitely. It's right in my
I saw them flash faces like Bill Clinton, the Bushes, Trump, all of these politicians that I've always thought always were working together on how they could make that much more money off of us as a whole. I was kind of rather more interested in the fact that they described it as a religious mafia.
Yeah, I'm interested to see it.
Me too. I can't wait to finish off some of these episodes. I'll probably binge it this weekend. So everybody check out The Family on Netflix. All right, so I'm going to head right on into the presentation. And if we could go full screen on that. So this I found actually this weekend I thought was rather interesting, or not this weekend, this week in my homework studies for graphology, which is the behavioral trading or the psychological behavioral trading of an individual's handwriting at the time that the writing is written. And what I wanted to bring out, because I had often long thought about these D's that the Zodiac and Jack contain in their writing. So we have Jack up here at the top and we have the Zodiac here at the bottom. And we can see how the stems of these D's are leaned so far rightward that they look like they were going to fall over, or what we like to call the crossing of the lines. And if you can imagine, the crossing of the lines in the brain is kind of like going a little cuckoo. Anyways, in my studies, this is what it said. So I thought it was interesting to let everybody kind of check this out themselves. But this particular pink box is actually what is out of my studies. And they are talking about the D that this arrow is pointing to right here, because of course we see this far rightward slant on the D stem. So it says, notice the small D. Can you see how it's off balance? It slants so far to the right that it looks as if it's toppling over. This is referred to as the maniacal D, but do not instantly conclude that you're always dealing with a madman or raving lunatic when you see this. Now, I know that when we look at the Zodiac's handwriting and we see this, we know we're dealing with a madman or a raving lunatic. I just did not know that we would see characteristics of that in the handwriting until I got into graphology. So it says, as you already know, marked rightward slant is a characteristic of excitable individuals who overreact. When right slant is excessive, we can expect uncontrolled, irresponsible behavior and lack of resistance to both internal and external stresses. Therefore, any letter which slants more to the right than the rest of the writing indicates a temperamental nature prone to impulsive or erratic actions. The more extreme the inclination, the more frequently such letters appear, the more likely it is that the writer will exhibit antisocial behavior. It is considered more serious when this off-balance indicators appears in the D because this letter represents what a writer is rather than what a writer does. So if I could bring Nolan back on real quick. Huh. Is Nolan gone?
No, I'm here.
Oh, I can't see your little picture on the screen there. Okay. So as much as we know about the Zodiac, I had mapped out some of Jack's stuff up underneath here as well. And I found that the letter D is self-represented. So basically, like it says here, it's an indicator of what you are rather than what you do. In fact, I just put it out to many of my friends to give me a handwriting sample so that I can analyze it for them. I did a little bit of analyzation for one at one point, and I may go back and do even more as I learn my lessons. But is that something you think you'd be interested in letting me do, Nolan?
Sure. I tend to print, and it's kind of proper printing, but the faster I write, the more messy it gets.
Right, you get a little less concerned for form and read legibility, I suppose, unless somebody else has to read it, right?
Correct.
So as I was noticing up here, I just, like I said, mapped out some of Jack's D's at the top, and I mapped the Zodiac's D's at the bottom, and found that the slants of these D's in the stems were almost identical in many of the cases. And of course, I just plopped a few down from the handwriting presentation that we've been doing. So it's not like I looked to particularly find ones that matched those particular slants, but we can see that exists in both. And then I actually found one where the bowl of the D is actually streamlined right in with that stem, so it doesn't stick out or protrude, letting you know that that is a letter D. And I found that was consistent with what Jack was doing as well. So I thought that was rather interesting, and I look forward to doing your handwriting, and maybe we can even do it on the show.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
I was just noticing some of my D's. They're more upright, but they do have that little loop.
Right, and the loop is more of an indication of sensitivity to criticism. The larger the loop, the more bubbly it is, the more sensitive you are. So many of us have loops, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are super sensitive or self-concerned about what others think. It could be in different areas. We could be sensitive to criticism about ourselves, about our work, about things we do. So it really, once you wrap that sensitivity up with the rest of the analyzation, then you get a better understanding maybe of what that sensitivity is about. But the letter D is the letter T and the letter D. I want to look at it like the letter T is the representation of how you act, whereas the letter D is a representation of you and yourself. And that brings us to the letter T's, where we're at right now. So we'll take this full screen. And of course, we start at the top with Jack, as we have done so far. We show that I call it the Tau T, or it has the curve or hook at the bottom of it, just like the copybook T in print. We can see the different variations. We have low cross T-bars. We have concaved T-bars. Sometimes we have him crossing very close to the very top with just a small portion of the stem of the T sticking out. As we go down, we start to see some of these long T's where the crossbar is very low at the bottom, but we still kind of see that little curvature that occurs. It almost occurs in almost all of his T's. We do have a few of them that don't have it, but for the most part, he tends to have that curvature or that kick up at the bottom of the T. We also have what I refer to as the plus T, because he has equally crossed the crossbar across that T, about the same length as the stem and midway point, so it makes it look more like a plus sign than it does a letter T if it was set separate and by itself. I did pull out some of his double T's. I noted in most of his double T's, he actually crosses the T's separately, though we do have one here where he crossed completely across with one stroke. But for the most part, we see this lowered T bar on the left-hand side and a little bit higher. And we had a right T that was a little bit smaller and kind of lifted up off the ground, like we had talked about in many of Jack's and the Zodiac's handwriting, where they have that uplift, like we talked about on the letter H to the capital T last week. I did pull out some cursive T's, and then we had kind of this funky looped T, but I brought this one out, and you'll find these single stroke T's where he has crossed. He came down the stem and then in one full stroke moved back upwards and then crossed over with the crossbar. And there were several of those in the Atlanta, Georgia, which is similar to the movement that we see here, that movement down, back up, and then of course the cross of the actual crossbar. So making note of a lowercase t in the Lipstick Killers, we had this tented version, and this indicates stubbornness. And we have this crossbar that is actually jetting downward in a decline, which is notable for being domineering. Now, what I noted here is that in Jack's, we have also this tented T, which is exactly what the Lipstick Killer did. We have this up kick off the bottom right-hand side, which again we see. And now the crossbar is a little more leveled out, but it does have a slight decline on it in Jack's. So we had a very similar formation in the aspect that it was tented, it has the uptick, and it is definitely leaning rightward. We have talked a lot about the combination JTs, or these Jack Tarrance indicators, as Terry B likes to put out there. And I do look at these more like a monogram, I guess, if you will. And in Elizabeth Short, we saw that continuation of the Tau T. We saw the T that was crossed very close to the top with a little bit of the stem sticking out. And then, of course, this one has a backwards loop. We do note that the Zodiac Killer liked to write some of his letters backwards, and we've seen it in D.B. Cooper and a few other cases, which is just another connection factor. But as we get over here into the T at the end of Elizabeth Short, we're going to find more of these and these high crossed T's that we talked about in Elizabeth Short as we go through the presentation. And the Kern Werewolf Killer, I saw that many of the T's were pretty much just on par with the crossbar. Again, this one is very similar to the one up there in Elizabeth Short. We see that the concaved crossbar is also a part of this. And we also saw this backwards JT. So the backwards Tau T that really acts as a J and a T at the same time. When I got over into Oswald, again, no shock. We have a T there that is absolutely identical in slant, in crossing, in size to the Elizabeth Short murders, and that's in the letter to the Dallas PD for the JFK case. Sherry Jo Bates, we also found the same style T once again, all the way through to what I refer to as that very long T. So here's where we start to see the very long stem with a very short crossbar that is at a very lowered position in consideration to where a cross should be on the T. And we see the slight curvature coming out of the bottom of this particular T in Sherry Jo Bates, which is just matching, pretty much dead on what Jack is doing. When I got over into the Deer draft board, we found more consistencies, although the first two T's that I pulled out, they had the appearance of being straight. But again, this version of the straight with no curvature is definitely happening in Jack's handwriting. We can see up here. And we do see these tiny little crossbars that Jack does that we're seeing in the Deer draft board. And then that eventually moves its way into those Tau T's again. And when I map this particular Tau T out from the draft board, we can see that that is identical to Jack's. This one has a slight curvature to the right, but we see that little exit stroke at the bottom of that T. We see the lowered crossbar that is very small and short in comparison to some of these other T's that we're going to look at, but again, just right in line with Sherry Jo Bates as well. The Zodiac Killer's T's, as we go through, a lot of them look like plus signs to me. We also had the concave crossbars that we can see that are occurring here that we talked about up in Jack's. We also had the Tau T's, again, very similar. We see that that one is very close in relation to the one right here in Jack's handwriting. And then I did map out that slant again for everybody. So this blue bar you see up here in Jack's, I just copied and pasted it next to the rest of these T's so that you could see that the slant was in line. Since that hard right slant is something that's very consistent with the Zodiac and Jack, I wanted to compare that to the rest of the communications. Moving on through, we do find, again, some consistency with the double T's. Number one, they are crossed separately. They are not a single stroke across, which is consistent with Jack's. The right T is smaller than the left T, and jumps up from the baseline just a tad there. So it is raised up just like we see in Jack's handwriting. When I got into the Fairfield letters, again, we had the plus sign that we were talking about. We had the T's that were crossed very close to the top with a little tiny bit of the stem sticking out. Again, consistent with what we saw in Jack's writing. Right there. Sorry, I should have marked it. At any rate, that is a consistent disguise that we are going to see. In fact, the Fairfield letters were extremely consistent with things like the Channel 9 newsletter, but we already know that that comes from the Zodiac. And the herb cane also had that very close crossing to the top with just a small portion of the tip of the T sticking out. We saw it again over here in the second herb cane letter. As I went down the line, let's see where else we found these guys. Oh, wow. All right, so it is a consistency, obviously, that we are seeing between the Zodiac communications. And if I see more of them as we go through, I'll point those out. Again, we found the double cross T. So this is two T's that are together and they are crossed separately. We have the left one that is larger than the right one, and the right one in this particular case looks more like a plus sign again. In the DC Freeway Phantom, I found consistency with the letter T that is very consistent with Elizabeth Short's and some of these others that we talked about in the position and placement of the crossbar, the actual length of the stem, and that rightward slant is also consistent. DB Cooper, we had a couple different T's that we looked at. Most of the stuff was capital letters in that, but these were some very interesting ones. We talked about that crossing from the left-hand side that doesn't protrude to the right, but we can see as we get down there, he's starting to come out to the right here. I did mark these down because this crossing to the left and not coming over the right side of the stem was consistent with a T that I found in Voinovich and also T's that I found in Bruce Ivans. So in the Bruce Ivans, the difference here is we have that very long stem that he is noted for in Sherry Jo Bates and some of these others. We see it in the Albany letter. Let's see here. I found it in the Citizen letter. That's the length of that stem in comparison to the crossbar itself. Back here, we do find the double T's. Again, this one, I'm not really quite sure due to the image whether or not this is broken here. It does look like that's a possibility, but I can't state that for sure. Although we do know that Jack Cannon will cross with a single crossing across that the two T's. And we also note that the slant and the lean of that particular set of T's is consistent as well with Jack's. When I got into the Albany letters, we found not only the Tau T, so again, we have that very, very tall stem, and we have the very low crossbar, and we actually have that kick out at the bottom, which was consistent, I mean, with these curvatures, that movement to the right as he exits the letter T. Finding again the concaved crossbar that is consistent with Jack and the Zodiac. Getting into SLA, we found more of the plus style T's. We found, again, the formation of the T that is consistent with Elizabeth Short and is consistent with Sherry Jo Bates. Well, it's actually, this particular T is consistent with just about every single communication that we're going to talk about. And let's see here, more plus sizes. When we got into the Citizen letter, I found there was a cross between both the tall, very tall stem T's and the plus style T's, with, of course, the slant being consistent as well. Channel 9 newsletter, this is where we saw more of those T's that are crossed closer to the top with just a tiny bit of the stem sticking out. And again, the plus style T that we found so far. Riverside was extremely consistent with the long T's because this Riverside, yes, this is the Red Phantom letter. I misnamed that the Riverside, but I tried to change that. We see this again, this looped T. So this is the first time that we see the T where the crossbar is actually connected off of the stem and in one full stroke, almost like the star formation, which we then end up seeing in the Atlanta, Georgia child killer letters as well. In the Oakland County child murders, I found a couple of the T's. Of course, we know the Tau T is definitely a Jack trait. And then we see that at the end here, we have one of those T's again that are crossed so close to the top that only a tiny bit of that stem protrudes. Also found that particular style in Herb Cain. So it doesn't shock me that there is this cross-reference in the actual formation of these letters from one to the next, since these are so close in time frame. That continued on through the second Herb Cain in the guess, and we found these plus T's again. So aside from the ones that are crossed very close to the top, we have that plus sign. The Atlanta, Georgia child murders carried the same style T that we saw occurring up in Elizabeth Short and some of these others. Moving over into the second letter with the Atlanta, Georgia, which I actually just skipped onto a new line of research yesterday, Nolan, is that the March 1981 Atlanta, Georgia child murder letter indicates something about you rebels don't get it kind of thing. He's trying to get them to understand that he is the same person that was killing women in San Francisco, but now he's in Atlanta killing children. And when he mentioned the word rebels, I about kind of fell out of my chair for a second, because I do have a picture in Jack's belongings of a ball cap from the University Nevada, Las Vegas, which has their mascot, which is the Rebels. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
So this ball.
Mississippi is Rebels too. University of Mississippi is Rebels as well.
Really? Yeah. Well, the letters on the ball cap is UNLV. To my take, and I'm going to show that here. I feel like inside this letter as well, he says that he's left clues by all the bodies. So this notion that I've been talking about and the possibility that the watch found at the Sherry Jo Bates crime scene actually came from the Swindles murder, because he was not only military and the watch was obtained, as they believe, on a military base, that he was also a painter and the watch had paint flecks on it. So they likened that watch, I think, as you remember, to the suspect, right?
Yep. And Swindles, that was Southern California?
Yes, that was down in the lower or Southern California, basically.
Yeah, south of LA.
Yeah. I noted, and it wasn't until I started doing this podcast that I realized that there was any connection between those two, and that was a plausibility after watching something on TV that indicated that Zodiac was leaving clues, which was something I hadn't been aware of for most of the years that I've been involved with this. But if that's how they were making that connection, and that's why law enforcement was actually making the connection and believed way back when that all of these murders were connected to each other, then that's something they never relayed to the public. And it may be something we never actually hear out loud from the police, because that might be the one thing that they can keep close to the hip that would allow them to, weed out copycats. But the fact that there is a possibility that this watch from the Swindles was then placed at the crime scene of Sherry Jo Bates as a connection to those murders, we have now a communication that's indicating this is exactly what he was doing. So what he meant by certain clues, we may never actually know, but I know that the communications tie themselves one into the next based on some of these clues. And one, when he said the Rebels, I have a picture, and this picture is in Jack's belongings. It's of a ball cap on the ground, and it has the UNLV, and I believe what I can make out to be the Rebels insignia, or their little mascot that is on the side of the hat. I thought it was extremely interesting to see if I couldn't locate a murder, because it looks like there's a giant blood spot next to this ball cap. Either way, I digress. New stuff that we'll be talking about when we get to that point. OCCK, Herb Cain, Atlanta, Georgia. So in Atlanta, Georgia, we had, again, some of the same styles. We had the same slant, same formation, some with low crossbars, some with high crossbars. Sacramento basically followed the same the same rhyme and rhythm. We see again, was that?
Oh, nothing.
Okay. We see again those plus signs right on into the Christmas card. Again, something attributed to the Zodiac Killer. Scorpion letter T's were absolutely right on par as far as the height of the crossbar, or the level of the crossbar in consideration to the height of the actual stem. Very consistent again. We also saw the larger, and so this one is marked here because the double T again crossed separately from one another. We have the left side that is longer, the right side is shorter, and the right one tends to hop up a little higher than that left T again. I'm not sure if this was just an image that occurred because of the bleed through of the ink, but it also looks like this one potentially has that cross because it looks like the pen was not picked up and that was one full stroke like we were looking at back here in the Atlanta, Georgia Killer. But we also see that the slant is very similar and on par with what we're looking at. Moving right on into the JonBenet Ramsey note, we see again, we have T's that do not have the tau part of them, but we have many T's that do have the curvature at the bottom of the T, and the consistency again in size, placement of the crossbar, and the lean, the rightward lean that we saw so far. In Voinovich, again, we have that backwards JT, so we can now see how, what's that? Say that again.
All the JonBenet letters to me.
Say that again. You cut out.
Look like they're the JonBenet letters, including the T's.
Right. Yeah. No, there's many similarities between these. And again, I try to. Are you there, Nolan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I don't know what's going on with the sound.
I know. It's kind of like you're cutting in and out or something.
You're going in and out.
Then I wonder, is everything good on your end, Juan? Is it sounding... Hit me up with a yes.
I can't hear Juan. Oh, no.
No, it's not good, or no, it's not happening. His internet is cutting in and out. So it's yours, Nolan. I'm good. We can hear you. If I have to re-ask you, I'll re-ask you. So anyways, in the Voinovich,
okay, I hear you fine now.
Perfect. We do see this JT inclusion, which is the Jack Tarrance monogram, very consistent with what we see up here in the Lipstick Killer, including at the point in which he crosses that T very close to the top, and we just see a small section of the stem sticking out the top. So another consistency there. Moving into the TH. Now, I found this in, obviously, we're going to see that hitting the backside of the H. We talked about this with the capital letter T, but we also talked about the consistency between the shape of that H and that very elongated and short hump that comes off of it. And onto the Bruce Ivans, again, we have the very tall T's that are crossed low. We do have a couple that are crossed about more midway, but again, there's just so many striking similarities with these letters. And then when I got into, we skipped right over Tom Voigt. Not only did we see the plus signs, we also saw the tau T with the little kick up at the bottom, very similar, if not completely consistent with Jack's writing. And the slant again is the same. And here we find again that letter T that we found up in so many other of these communications. Let's move on to the letter U. In Jack's, we found, for the most part, the only time he used a stem was on the capital U's. So we found most of his to just look like the horseshoe U, and some of them tend to be a little angular and almost like a V in shape versus the rounded U that we would expect to see. But as we move through, we also saw the square U, which we'll talk about, I want to say is over here. We saw it used in the D.B. Cooper case. Again, moving into the Lipstick Killers, the only U that I had there was one that was extremely angular. likely the attempt to disguise that letter U. But we did see that in Elizabeth Short, we had both the horseshoe version and this more angular version that we were talking about, just dead on what Jack is doing over here. In the French lipstick murder, where he wrote on the back of the individual with lipstick, we saw two types of U. One is the horseshoe, and then one is this more V-shaped that we're discussing. Again, this one is very consistent with the one we see right here in Jack's handwriting. When I get into the Sorry, Mary, that was all capital letters, and we see the capital letter U is very consistent with Jack's writing in that this lower bar. So if we look at this U here, we can see that the entrance stroke is actually shorter than the right side of that U and stem as it comes down. And we kind of see almost a slight curvature to that image there, which is what we're seeing here with Jack's. And this U pops up many, many times in these further communications as we go down the line. I found it over here in Oswald. Those are extremely similar in shape. In the Kern, which is the real estate murder, we found both, again, the horseshoe U and this more V-shaped U, which is very consistent with Jack. The Sherry Joe Bates U, also I mapped out the slant of this particular letter as well, and we can see that the slants in every single one of these communications are consistent with what we're looking at in Jack's handwriting and in the Zodiacs. The Sherry Joe Bates U was extremely consistent with the citizen letter U's, where the stem is actually separated from the U itself. We do see in the uppercase U's here, this one in particular has the same shape of the actual round of the bottom portion of the U that we're seeing up here in Jack's. Very angular. Let's see where we are. The Dear Draft Board letter, we found the two different types of U's. So while he attempted to show us this horseshoe-shaped U and the angular versions that look more like V's, he also carried on with a U with an actual stem, and we can see that stem sticking out. We've talked about this one, I believe, in the letter A as well. This extension of the exit stroke is extremely consistent with those letters, and we do see that that is happening in things like the citizen letter. So this is why I state that these have similarities and consistencies with each other, because this attempt to disguise using this exit stroke is exactly what we see in some of these other communications. Let's see, in the Zodiac, we had the V shapes, which are all consistent with Jack's. We have, again, the attempt to use a stem on the letter U. This consistency, again, right here in the Zodiac is consistent with the letters that come out of the citizen letter. And then we do see more of these ones with this angular portion of the round. Well, it should be rounded, but this more angular portion of the bottom of the U. The Fairfield letters, again, in his disguise here, he attempts to make them look almost shaky, if you will, but we do see, again, that stem that is sticking out that we were discussing, and it sticks out and protrudes downwards below what would be the baseline. If there was a line drawn completely underneath this, that stem would stick out the bottom, and we see that happening not only in the Fairfield letters, but the Citizen, in the Herb Cain letters, in the Sacramento letter. Let's see, where else did we mark green? I did try to add some more colors here. Does it make it a little easier to find the ones I'm talking about now, Nolan?
A little bit.
By adding the colors instead of them all just being red and blue?
Yes.
At least it'll make it easier for people to see which ones I found to be similar in shape and size. The Atlanta, Georgia Killer did the same thing, tried to do this little looped exit stroke off of some of them. Of course, we don't see them on all of them, and we see some are just, malformed because he's really attempting to disguise his handwriting at that point. Either way, as you go through here, we then see some more capital U's. These U's definitely have this angular shape at the bottom of the round where the entrance stroke comes down to the baseline and then moves its way back up. Consistent with Jack's handwriting, so are the slants. We again see some of these U's where the left side is shorter than the right side. And then we find that consistency, like I was saying, that led the document examiners to conclude that many of the letters, such as the citizen letter, was written by the Zodiac Killer. The Albany, New York has more of these, I want to call them the horseshoe, but we see that they are a little more angular at the bottom, just like what we're looking at up here. And they also have these curvatures that kind of bring the two stems in closer to each other at the top, which is very consistent with what Jack is doing. The SLA, now this one is a bad image, but if you kind of just follow my cursor here, here is the round of the U, and then we see this tail that comes straight out to the right-hand side here. And that's what we were just talking about, is that extended tail that we saw back here in the deer draft board. So there's a definite consistency between SLA and the deer draft board. Along with the citizen letter, we see again this U that we were just talking about up here with the angularity at the bottom of the round. The tails, the Channel 9 newsletter also had extremely similar U's to Jack's. I would say that they are closest to this particular U right here, even with the little flip out of the stem that occurs down here at the bottom. And then that moves into not only the ones that he attempts to use a stem, but in the end, obviously, as his hand starts to tire, he starts using his stereotypical U, which does not include a stem. And that's kind of what I tell everybody about. When somebody's attempting to disguise, they begin with one fashion and then end in what is probably likely to be more truer to their normal handwriting. And we can see that not only do these match the slants, but they also match the shape of Jack's U's. And that includes the red phantom letter. Again, we have these horseshoe ones that get closer at the top to one another, kind of almost like they're going to close up like an O. We see that the left side is shorter than the right side. And that continues on into the Oakland County child murders. So we get to see more of these U's that are very consistent with Jack's, including this this more angular portion, or it happens on this right-hand side right here. And we can see that that's what's occurring up here in Jack's, is this more angular or squared off portion. We did cover the herb cane as far as the stem that comes down. Slant again is similar. The U's that are cross-referencing this one with that shorter side, this U is definitely more consistent with the one we see up here in Jack's. Atlanta, Georgia, we again found two different types of U's. Of course, it starts out as the horseshoe U, albeit made to look shaky, as if an elderly person was writing it, but we know that the elderly wasn't out there killing. So, and then back into these particular U's that we found over here in the citizen letter. So this U right over here on the side is extremely consistent with the U's that we're finding in the citizen letter. So no reason to believe that, as this person is indicating that he used to be the person who killed in San Francisco, there's no reason for me to disbelieve that this is not the truth, because it is appearing, though, that the handwriting is working out to match just fine with all of the other communications, including the Zodiac Killers. Atlanta, Georgia, we pointed out again that use of that extended exit stroke and similarities with the Deer draft board letters. So again, I find that these are consistent. Sacramento letter, again, a little bit muddy because of the quality of it, but we can see those consistencies with the tail that sticks down and goes below the baseline. We also have some that have just a little kick out. And we also have at the very beginning, it looks like one of those horseshoe U's without a stem at all. So we flip-flops back and forth between these two versions. The scorpion letter U, we did find the horseshoe version was pretty consistent with what was being done, but I do find that these are very consistent with the horseshoe shapes that we have looked at so far, including like Elizabeth Short. Just the style of it, left side is shorter than the right side, and we can see that that's consistent with what's going on there. And the slant, again, is one and the same, basically. And we can see kind of the weight of the actual script itself is similar in appearance. And as I went down and I started to compare the scorpion U's, they were most consistent with the John Benet Ramsey U's, again, shorter on the left side, higher on the right side, including some that are actually curved more inward to themselves. That makes it look like they're closing themselves up, again, like the letter O. So a consistency for sure between Scorpion and Jean Bonnet. The Anthrax shoes were kind of not a lot notable, but the shape is definitely similar to what Jack has going on. And then we climb right on into Tom Voigt, and we can see that a lot of the U's not only have that lowered left side in comparison to the right side, but we can find that the shapes of the ones with stems are consistent in slant. The pointing of the bottom of that bowl to the left, consistent with one another. Again, not a shocker, as the Tom Voigt letters had been identified by a family member as being Jack's handwriting. In the finale letter with Tim Miller, we found both styles of U's. Once again, we have those without stems and we have those with stems. So the Bruce Ivans, that was more consistent with the V shape of Jack's V-shaped U's. So clearly, as we go back and forth between these U's, we see some definite consistencies. Is all of that making sense?
Yes. It's interesting to note that many of them both have just the regular U without the line, but then there's some with the line. But then there's others that are very consistent. No line, no line, no line, or always a line. Like in my writing, it's always a line on the side.
Right. Some people use it, some people do not. And it's interesting to note that Jack only uses it in his capital U's. So if he was thinking of disguise and all he used were these horse-shaped U's in his mind, in his lowercase writing, to add that stem would now be a difference. And that would set supposedly him apart from this writing, if you will. But we do know that he's capable of doing it and that this is his preference. And the fact that in some of these he flip-flops back and forth between a stem and no stem, or the use, like you said, of all stemmed. I think that in some of these, as I pointed them out, there would be just, one horseshoe shaped one, and then the rest have a stem. That tells you that somebody's manipulating their handwriting. Otherwise, he would have stuck with the same style in a single communication, unless he was attempting to manipulate or make it look like he was writing with a different style, and then reverting naturally back to the ones that he was used to using. Obviously, like I was saying right here in the Sacramento letter, the majority of them have a stem except for that first one right there.
Right. And then the first one on Jack has a stem.
Right, yes, and those are capital U's.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are capital U's. Yeah, okay. So, like I said, in his lowercase U's, he did not use a stem. So if I was a person trying to disguise my handwriting and I wrote like this as a horseshoe the whole time, I would add that stem, obviously, to make it look. That's the only way you could really make a U look different, right? Add a stem. Yep. So I think that's why we're seeing these with stems in many of these communications, because we do definitely see where he clearly, when he looks like he's writing faster in the Zodiac stuff, he's not using a stem at all. These far rightward ones that are written quickly with haste do not have stems. And then we get into the ones that look more perfect, such as some of these U's that we got from, I would believe, the Stein letter, where he attempted to make it look more like a conforming copybook U. He uses a stem. Yep. The letter V, interesting. I noted it was kind of a swap with the letter V. He has his very angular V's, as we see here. And of course, the left side, again, is shorter than the right side, with that far reaching and upward stroke away from the base on the right side. We also had the horse-shaped U, which, again, is a V. So he kind of swaps back and forth between these two letters, where in the U's, he makes some of them look like V's, and in his V's, he makes some of them look like his U's. The lipstick letter V that we found, not only is it shorter on the left side than on the right side, but I found that to be considered very consistent with the Atlanta, Georgia child murder case. I found as we go through, we'll see it in the D.B. Cooper right there, very similar in shape and construction, width at the top, length of the bars, even this this rightward slant that we're seeing here. I noted in Jack's of course, again, lower on the left, higher on the right. But these were extremely consistent with the Sorry Mary letter V's. So as we go through this one, I didn't map out different colors on it, but it was such a short slide. I figured it's relatively easy to cross-reference those that are similar in appearance. Now in the kern, I found 3 that were actually angular, like a V is supposed to be. And then I found one that is more of that rounded horseshoe style. Sherry Jo Bates definitely had horseshoe style V's, which are consistent with Jack's U's. The short V's that we found over here, one leans rightward, one leans leftward. Again, a sign somebody's attempting to manipulate their handwriting, but still very consistent in shape and size with the Zodiac Killers. Here again is that V. Now, of course, these are slanting a little bit to the left, but this is the V that I noted over here in Sorry Mary and in the Lipstick Killer. That it's very consistent in shape, form, slant, things of that nature. The Zodiac Killer V actually was extremely similar. This one in particular, and I don't know if it was the type of utensil that the authors were using, but we see this thickening that's happening on the right side here, Nolan.
Yeah.
I found that to be consistent with what was going on over here in the Sherry Jo Bates. We can see that the left side is very thin, but somehow that utensil, when he writes up to the right, leaves a whole lot more ink on the right-hand side. And of course, graphology speaks about this, but I haven't got into the ductus yet. And that's what we're talking about now, is the way the pen lays down the ink. But I found that that was similar with it in the communications from these murders. So in the Zodiac... What's
once
that?
Once again, the John Benet Ramseys always look like they're faked or trying to disguise.
Exactly.
They're the weirdest looking. All the John Benet letters are all weird looking.
Yeah, it's almost as if he attempted to make this, again, very shaky appearance in the letters, which is consistent with, like I said, the Atlanta, Georgia child killer case. We did see a couple of and this may allude to the fact that he was using the opposite hand. That shakiness that occurs, the lack of control that one has by using the non-dominant hand. I'm not going to say that is entirely true for these letters. I have not mapped that completely out yet, but it is a possibility. Either way, I find that the attempt to make things look shaky occurred in more than one of these communications. So Fairfield letters, I found that the letter V here actually was extremely consistent with what we were seeing over here in John Benet. So we see this attempt to make these curvatures as the V exits out to the right-hand side. We see that that's a little bit longer as it like sweeps, I guess, over to the right. Let's see if I found that one consistent with me. Oh, Voinovich, that attempt to curve that right-hand side. So we did find some of those in the Voinovich case. Let's see here. DB Cooper, we had that V we just spoke about. We also had an attempt at what would be a block V, I guess, if you will, because we have a straight bottom there. I did not find any of those in Jack's handwriting, but these little tiny U's, or V's, sorry. These little tiny V's are very consistent with some of the stuff out of the Zodiac Killer's hand. So leaning to the right, heavily leaning to the right again. The Albany, New York V's were again consistent with the Lipstick Killer V's, which were consistent with DB Cooper, consistent with the Atlanta, Georgia child killer. The Citizen letter had again these more horseshoe-shaped V's that are not as angular, but again very consistent with that lower side on the left and the higher side on the right, and then more of that U shape versus a V shape. Channel 9 News went back and forth. Or actually, these ones did tend to be a little more angular, but very consistent with Herb Cain's letters. Also consistent with the OCCK, we see a cross between the U shape. We're down to a minute. It looks like we are not going to finish the U's today. But I did want to, I will continue next week, finishing off with the U's. It looks like we have about 1 to 2 more weeks, probably. Hopefully I can get through the rest of these letters. this next week, and then move on to punctuation the following week. And then we are going to move right back into the Zodiac cases. Thank you, Nolan, for joining us again today. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Just let the citizen V's look a lot like Jack's V's.
Right. There's so many consistencies as I go back and forth between these that when we looked at this letter V here being consistent with this letter V here, again, the angularity to the roundedness that we're finding that are in these letters are just amazing. So again, we have a consistency here. We have I think when he tries to write more as if he's disguising, he uses this strict V shape, but when he gets relaxed, he goes back into that horseshoe shape that is more rounded. But all right, everybody, I'm going to let you go. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.
Bye.
Oh,